Hello and welcome to Builders. I'm your host Lee Haynes, and today I'm joined by Marco Pineda, Director of Cybersecurity at EY. Marco has deep expertise in helping organizations navigate digital threats while building resilient, trustworthy systems in an increasingly AI-powered world. At EY, he advises global clients on transforming cybersecurity from a cost center into a strategic enabler, one that protects value while driving it. We're going to explore what makes a great cybersecurity professional, how AI is reshaping the workplace, and why caution is essential when adopting AI tools in security-sensitive environments. Marco, a warm welcome to the podcast. How's it going?
Thank you very much, Lee. It's going great. Thanks. Really appreciate being on the call, being on this podcast.
We appreciate you joining us. Let's get straight to it. I want to start with a little bit with your background and your journey, really. So, can you share a bit about your journey into cybersecurity? What sparked the interest? How you ended up in leadership at EY?
Sure. That's quite easy, actually. So I started out at university. I studied computer science, and I thought I wanted to be a developer. Did that for a couple of years, 4 years actually, a boutique development firm for Swift software. I don't know if folks know about that, but it's a funds transfer software that all the banks use. Great experience, but I found that I enjoyed breaking things more than I did building things, to be frank. So while I was there, I kind of got interested in encryption. I also got interested in, how security systems work and how they fail. Thus, my interest in breaking into things. Got a little bit into penetration testing and decided that really was the career path that really interested me. So I think it's quite as simple as that. I still write code. I enjoy writing code, but I write code for myself these days, or for security purposes.
So like pet projects that you just have on the side for
precisely.
fun.
And we're going to be talking about AI a bit later, so I've been playing around with that as well. But yes, exactly. Little hobbyist stuff.
Yeah, and I'm just interested to kind of hear your kind of in the field, have been for a very, very long time. I mean, cybersecurity is a really, really kind of broad field, broad term as well. I'm just interested to hear if you had to kind of distill cybersecurity into like a single, concise definition. How would you define it? How would you define cybersecurity?
It really is protecting digital assets, and for the most part, that means information. I think almost saying like protecting information is, it's almost it's an odd thing to say, because these days I think almost everything's information, really. I mean, even in manufacturing, you've got like your plans, your business plans, you've got plans for the products that you're manufacturing, etc. Everything these days, to say it's an information economy is already kind of trite at this point and moot. So I think if I had this still, that's all it is. It's really just protecting digital assets.
And now you've worked across, different industries and regions as well. What experiences would you say have most shaped your leadership philosophy in the space?
I one of the things that I really loved about cybersecurity, is that because it's such a portable skill, indeed, that I have the ability to work across industries, and I've had that, and even more so here at EY, where we have customers from many different industry verticals, right? And I think in all of them, I can't say that one particular industry shaped my leadership skills, because certainly all of them had something to contribute to that. In financial services, there's very much especially in New York, where I spent a good deal of my career, for large banks, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley. I think certainly I learned the value of collaboration, working across, understanding the business, because ultimately cybersecurity is in support of the business and making sure there's value attached to what we do. So that's kind of one of them. Certainly, when I was with the space company Beyond Gravity, I very much learned the value of working with very intelligent people who are trying to get a mission accomplished, right?
Mm.
Um, we were, my time out there, we were involved with several significant projects, James Webb Space Telescope just being one of them. And those are the kind of things where you're working as part of a very large group of people as your company, and a lot of different contractors, prime and subcontractors. So that kind of uh, cross organization collaboration was very important. And then my
Mm.
time with the World Economic Forum really taught me um, the value of the kind of the public-private partnerships, really, and how even though my background is private sector, it's like how different the calculations are and the culture
Mm.
is from the public sector sort of folks, having to work with them and deal with them and seeing how different that world really was. So,
Mm.
but I think across the board, leadership and cybersecurity, frankly, both kind of transfer fairly well. The skills that you use in one sector easily
Yeah.
transferable to the other, with the caveat of being sensitive to the different kind of cultural nuances, depending on the industry, the role, the sector, etc. So
Mm.
I can't say like any one industry did. I think all of them contributed to
Mm.
my style, my leadership style today.
Mm. And you mentioned working in both public and private sectors there. Obviously, protecting information and data is equally important to, let's say, all companies and all industries, right? But I can imagine that those sectors threw up different challenges, right? I can imagine. Can you talk a bit about kind of how the challenges may be varied between those two sectors?
Oh, absolutely. Well, if you think about, let's just say a bank, right? I mean, the information assets that you're talking about are fairly straightforward. Customer data, maybe trading information, material amount public information. If you're working for an investment bank, for instance, you have to protect things that might move markets. I think that's one
Mm.
thing. Public sector, whole different set of challenges there, where you're thinking about really protecting public services and infrastructure sometimes, like how those things go, like keeping services going in that case. There's some similarities, but it's really
Mm.
quite a different sort of animal.
Mm.
And of course, there is really, for me, the nuance of you're really talking about public funds there. So we have to be
Yeah.
sensitive to the fact that, you're using government funds for some work that, so you have to sort of justify that, especially in democracies too. To the voter, for instance, it has to look like your delivery value for the work that you're doing. So I think those are the kind of nuances that I had to learn moving into that kind of work. I wasn't necessarily in the public sector, but I was certainly working with folks who were working for governments and government industries, et cetera, ministries, I should
Right.
say. So I think those are the kind of things that I had to learn. Sometimes the hard way, but that's okay. You get put in your place. But yeah, not everything's transferable in that sense.
Mm.
But yeah, that's what I mean by learning the nuances of the particular
Yeah.
vertical that you're at.
Yeah. To talk a little bit now about hiring and talent in cybersecurity. When you hire cyber experts today, for you, what are non-negotiables? Like what traits or mindsets or let's say signals separate someone that's good versus someone who might be exceptional, for example?
That's an interesting question. It's something that I have debates with other CISOs as well. Of course, I'm a former CISO at this point,
Mm.
so my the kind of skill sets that we're looking for are a little bit different. Um, I I've always come up, and I want to be. There's a nuance to this. I think in general, I find it easier to bring to teach a technical person soft skills than the other way around. So a
Right.
lot of times I would tend, and because that's my background, tend towards the more technical resource because I
Hmm.
feel that I can teach them, depending on the person, more the soft skills, communication that needs to happen, the collaboration with other people.
Mm.
On the other hand, I don't want to devalue the folks who come in from less technical backgrounds because I think there's room in cybersecurity for folks who have more, for instance, a risk background or policy background. There's a lot
Mm.
underpinning. In some ways, that's a technical skill as well to be able to understand and write a policy well. So what
Yeah.
I'm looking for is fluency and ability in that particular domain that I'm hiring somebody for, whether it's for a risk professional or a technical professional, somebody who's working in a cybersecurity red team, for instance, right? But
Mm.
generally, I don't like to use the term, but I guess the unicorn, like the perfect person, obviously has a technical background, whichever it is.
Mm.
And they also have this sort of soft skill nuance of being able to
Yeah.
communicate with people, being able to bring their message across. I think particularly for somebody in the CISO position, and I see this as well with, with my peers, they tend to come from one or the other. Uh, there needs to be the ability because you're speaking with C-suite, board, etc., to be able to
Mm.
communicate to folks who are not in the cybersecurity realm. And these are
Exactly. That's the
difficult
key
and sick
thing here,
concepts,
right?
right? Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Sorry to
Like
interrupt.
how do
It's
I
more
explain that
like,
to people?
yeah, exactly. And how do you assess whether someone is, is able to, or can translate these complex risk situations into this like essentially business ready insight, right? This is, I can imagine it's an increasingly like make or break skill for modern cyber leaders today, right?
I think absolutely. I think as I mentioned earlier, the what I thought was the value of understanding the business, and I think necessarily that means talking to the I'd say the business, because everybody's in the business, right? But on the,
Mm.
shall we say, like the main business part of an organization, like where they're doing their work, you have to
Mm.
understand what the organization's mission is, and that necessitates speaking to those folks, not just to learn what their requirements are, but to also be able to communicate our value to them. I think that's very important. I think in some
Mm.
ways that is very um, that very much parallels kind of the public sector sort of requirements of justifying, being able to justify your value to the stakeholders, right? Whether it be voters
Mm.
or business side folks, the folks in the C-suite, the folks at the front lines. Like, here's what we bring to the table as well. So it's a
Mm.
two-way thing. Understand what they need from you, but also be able to communicate what you're bringing to them. And
Yep.
let's face it, that your the nuances of your pen testing, whether you're using Kali Unix or not, that doesn't necessarily translate to the other side. What might translate
Mm.
is like, hey, we're keeping the firm from. We had several attacks last month. None of them were
Yep.
successful. We're able to keep that. Or we've gone X number of days without a serious incident, et cetera, et cetera. So
Yeah.
those are
This
kind of the
that's
things,
much more tangible for
right?
the recipient, right?
It's
Yeah.
understandable, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if folks were to come to me and talk, if you guys were to explain to me kind of the nuances of podcasting, for instance, I probably would not understand it. Yeah, but
Mm.
you'd have to explain it to me in a way that I could I could
Exactly.
kind of understand the value there. And that's a skill
Yeah.
certainly that I think anybody should have, frankly, whatever they're.
Yep. Yep. Well put. And we'll talk a little bit more about AI, obviously, soon. It's hard not to. But how do you spot candidates who can grow with the changing threat landscape? I mean, posed by AI, right? Because I've seen EY's own global research showing that only, I think it was 18% of cyber teams feel like fully prepared to manage these AI managed or AI related threats. So how do you spot
I,
candidates that can kind of really grow?
I was kind of shocked by that figure myself because I thought it was kind of high. I would
Mm.
say even fewer
Mm.
organizations are ready for it at this point.
Interesting.
And I'm
Yeah.
not just
Yeah.
talking about, I'm not just talking about the cyber side either. Talking about the businesses themselves, IT. I don't think
Yep.
anybody's quite prepared for that yet. Sorry. So the question was like, how do I spot people who I think will be ready for that for the future,
Yeah,
right?
and can kind of grow with that changing threat landscape, right?
I think so. Cybersecurity itself, to be perfectly transparent, I don't think. I think a lot of the basic principles, the fundamentals, I should say, haven't changed much in the couple of decades that I've been working in the field. It's still pretty much the same sort of. It's the CIA triangle, iron triangle. So confidentiality, integrity, availability. That's still kind of the
Mm.
basis of everything. How you manage things. We still use identity and access management systems. Are quite different these days, but nevertheless, the basic principles are still there. Be sure you're giving the resources access to the resources to the right individuals or systems, right? All
Hmm.
those things haven't changed very much. Cloud has sort of changed a bit. I think AI will change it a lot, but I think in certain ways, the fundamentals will stay the same. I think what's
Yeah.
important for a cybersecurity professional today is adaptability because things are changing. AI is just one of them. There are other fields as well, but AI certainly is the one that gets the most attention, is probably the fastest growing.
Mm.
That is something that even if you're comfortable with it today, you don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. So
Right.
adaptability is something that I really look for in somebody. It's like how how well can you adapt to change that's happening that
Mm.
might be imposed upon you that you're not driving yourself.
Yeah.
To me, that's probably the most important thing. You asked me earlier, I didn't
Mm.
quite answer. It's like what gives the standout character, a standout resource. What makes them like really exceptional. I think that's the thing, the adaptability to kind of different difficult situations to change.
Mm.
I think that's the most
Mm.
important thing that, again, I think across the board, any organization needs right now. Folks are willing
Yep.
to and able to change with the times.
Yep. In order to stay relevant, right, in the field, in so many different fields, like you say.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And if you're like comfortable with LLMs today, well, they're probably going to change tomorrow. So you better be
Yeah.
comfortable with getting
Exactly.
comfortable again. Or I guess, and to put it another way, get comfortable, be uncomfortable, right? Things are just going to be changing really,
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
fast.
Yeah. Yeah. Good point. Um, so let's talk a little bit about AI in the workplace and security operations. You've voiced optimism, I believe, about AI as like augmentation, right, rather than replacement, rather than replacing people. How do you see AI making workers in your field more productive without replacing them?
Listen, I think let's be realistic. I don't want to just put on rose-colored glasses here. I'm a security professional after all. I think that's really like
Mm. Mm.
counterintuitive, right? But so jobs will disappear. I think the jobs that folks have today will change necessarily. Um, what AI does today, and I've been a heavy user for the past few months, by the way. I think two things like understand what AI does, maybe even code for it. You have to understand what it actually is doing and what it actually is about. And what I've
Mm.
realized in the past few weeks of using it heavily is that it's not usually how it's portrayed in the media. It's not these bots coming in and replacing people. But what will happen necessarily in the future, because it's such a great force multiplier, because it does have the ability to make somebody just so much more productive.
Mm.
Let's just say, for instance, if you needed, I won't take cybersecurity, but just to say like a legal profession, if a law firm needed maybe 50 paralegals in the past, maybe in the future they'll just get 35, right?
Mm.
So
Mm.
necessarily there is some loss of jobs there. I think
Mm.
let's not kid ourselves there. At the same time, as a cyber professional, if I was back in the CISO seat and I was running operations, for instance, I would absolutely try to ensure that my folks had AI tools to help them. because I've seen how much more productive they can make you. And I've also made sure that they know how to use it. That's the thing. And that's the thing that kind of demystified it for me, having used it heavily, is that ultimately
Yeah.
it's just a tool. And it's how I
Yeah.
use it and the skill that one uses it, right?
Mm.
So I can't just give the guys at the SOC access to Copilot. That is nothing. Also, I'm not,
Mm.
I don't know if I'm getting value from my license, but I have to know,
Mm.
like, okay, what's your use case? How are you going to use it? Is it actually going to provide some value? And do you know how to use it? It might be some
Yeah.
training that needs to be involved. But if I did that, yeah, I can see these, I can see the average shop person, the average red team worker, the guys in the pen test. I can see them be like 125, 150, even 200% more, sorry, actually 100% more productive
Mm.
because
Mm.
it's that useful, I think.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but it doesn't do it all by itself. And of course, agentic's another story. But I think
Mm.
likewise there, it's not what people think it is either.
No. No. And we'll talk briefly about agentic AI very, very soon. But I just wanted to hear if there are any kind of real world examples that you can kind of share here from your experience, where it might be in threat detection. I don't know, incident triage, whatever it
No,
might be.
I mean, I think for cybersecurity professionals, we're a little bit jaded about the whole AI revolution. I mean, there is one, but
Mm.
in the SOC, we've been using machine learning for at least the last decade. It's been built
Yeah.
into our SIMs. It's part of a lot of threat detection sort of software and systems. We already have a lot of it in our alert systems. So yeah, there's lots and lots of you name the software, there's a bit of machine learning almost every aspect of the security operations center, right? So
Mm.
there are many, many
Mm.
examples of that one. To me, that's like nothing new. I think what could be new in the future as we get more into the agentic space is that even some of that might be even more automated.
Yeah.
And that's sort of revolutionary. And that's what's going to change the job a bit or a lot, frankly, in
Yeah.
the future. So that's what I can go on and on, but yeah, we've been using machine learning, AI type stuff for a long time.
There was, to raise another point from I think it was EY's global survey that found, while 95% of organizations are experimenting with AI, like everyone, large majority of companies are experimenting, right? Over half of them have already experienced some kind of AI related financial or compliance loss. So how do you like advise or help companies innovate safely while maintaining these guardrails? What are those guardrails that are set up?
It it's rather difficult to say that because it's very situational. Depends definitely
Mm.
on the setup, the use case, and the data model. I think basics for anything is to understand the data model that you're feeding into your LLM. How are you going to train it?
Mm.
What exactly it's capable of consuming and spitting out. I think one of the issues with LLMs, and like I think even the folks who are building it, I believe the CEO of Anthropic said, like rather controversially a few weeks ago, that they don't quite understand how LLMs do what they do. And
Mm.
those are
Mm.
guys who built it, right? So
Yeah.
I think that's a very telling thing, and we've seen a lot of papers based on that.
Yeah.
And I think that's where sort of the risk lies. You don't quite know what it's going to do, and we've seen examples already of kind of side prompt attacks or hidden prompt attacks where
Yeah.
you can sort of convince the LLM to give you data that it maybe shouldn't have. Having said that, the
Exactly.
guardrail, yeah, go ahead. You're going to say.
Yeah, no, I think it's just on the point of these LLMs, just, yeah, really on your point where you have this kind of prompt injection or data leakage attacks, right, that are becoming more common. Do you think organizations ignore the fact that these LLMs can be manipulated, like, or how easy are they to manipulate?
I'll be honest, and maybe this is a little controversial as well. I think that a lot of executives or businesses who are trying to implement AI don't understand it. As a matter of fact, I'll say that it's
Mm.
somewhat positive. I
Mm.
talked to a lot of folks who speak to bit about it in very rosy terms, who, after having been a heavy user again for the past few weeks, it's apparent that they don't use it themselves and don't understand how it
Mm.
works. You know,
Mm.
and to me, that's the issue, right? If you're going to try to communicate to me the value of an AI system, it's, I've been on the side of cyber where I'm trying to communicate value. It's like, you're not communicating the values. I don't understand what it is. And if you don't understand, if you can't teach me what you're getting out of it, then I don't think you understand yourself. I think that's kind of the
Mm.
biggest issue right now. And I would always, I think a good rule of thumb for the most part that makes sense to me is that the more boring the use case, the more effective it probably is. Like if you're trying to
Mm.
get rid of something that is completely unsexy, like, oh, I don't know, you just try to like file all your bills properly or something like that, and make sure to
Mm.
index that. Like the most mundane stuff, that's a perfect use case a lot of times. And that's the one
Mm.
that gives you the most value because it streamlines a lot of things. It's not
Yeah.
sexy. It's not like, oh, I don't know, finding the latest new investment, for instance. It's not necessarily that, but it does actually give value. I think those are the ones I kind of prefer. And I am seeing a lot like, and folks who have been in IT for a while have seen this many, many times where it's sort of the magic pixie dust
Mm.
principle. I say, like, they have some AI, they sprinkle or something, and all of a sudden, voila, it's much
Yeah.
better. And that's not the way it works. You
No.
have to know
No.
what you're doing.
Yeah.
And I think that's really what's missing right now. People are saying that, oh, we're AI first, or we're doing this, and they're not. Uh, they haven't justified it sometimes to themselves, much less
Mm.
to their stakeholders, right?
Mm. And as companies, continue or increase their kind of exploration here, or experimenting, and as AI becomes more integral in different parts of an organization, how do you think the balance of human versus machine responsibility changes in security operations?
Um, I think I'll go back to what a basic principle is over here. I think, at least for the foreseeable future for me, human in the loop is a basic principle
Mm.
people have to keep in mind.
Mm.
What that means is going to vary depending on the situation. But
Yeah.
essentially, particularly with agentic, make sure there's somebody checking out the work
Mm.
and being in the loop on decisions being made. And you're not
Mm.
just handing it over to the machine. I think that's very important. You
Mm.
might say that sort of, I don't think, by the way, that takes away the value of the automation. I think it
No.
actually enhances it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you don't want to get, again, we don't quite understand how the decision making process works all the time with automated AI systems, right? Agentic
Mm.
or generative. So it's best for somebody to go check it. I mean, I think the Australian example with the other big four firm kind of hit the papers very recently, and that's kind of more egregious. But to me, that's more sort of an edge case. I think more likely we'll see a lot of the kind of the lost value from folks who think they can automate away things that
Mm.
actually do need somebody in there making sort of decisions for you.
Yeah, exactly. I think too, on the topic of agents and everything, like you've mentioned it a couple of times. Agents, agentic AI is certainly the buzzwords of the year, right? Um,
Yeah.
but
This is the
in
moment.
addition to like, yeah, exactly. But what happens if we allow them to act too autonomously in critical security tasks specifically? We're
Yeah, yeah.
talking about kind of human in the loop here for decision making. Are there any other kind of guardrails or design patterns that you lean on or that you think are absolutely essential to kind of, um, yeah, not
I think
being so
those.
much
I
at
think
risk?
that's. Yeah, no. I think that's really, to me, that's the big basic one, is just make sure that you're not automating away something that somebody needs to take a look at. I think
Mm.
even something as simple, for instance, as triage, you'll have to have like this kind of period where you're making sure that these tickets that come in are triaged properly. In that case, there is
Yeah.
someone in the loop where the ticket gets sent over to somebody to kind of take a look, or is it an actual incident or not?
Mm.
But you have to realize too that you turn agentic on a little too soon and you're not sure about the noise that it's creating. Maybe you're putting too much of a strain on the same folks who you're supposed to be taking a load off of,
Mm.
right? So I think that's the kind of thing. I don't know. I won't talk too much about, I have been using LMs a lot, but I won't talk too much about the kind of guardrails because I'm not necessarily an expert on that part, but the internal
Mm,
guardrails of an AI system. But I think
mm,
externally, definitely what you need to do is like understand the kind of data, again, back to the data model, the data that your agents are consuming, access the MCPs that they have access to, what data do they have over there, and how
mm,
carefully you are managing. Again, in this case, we're talking about kind of basic cybersecurity. It's identity access
mm,
management, right? It's like agents, it's just automated systems. Am I sure that they have access only to the minimal data that they need to do to get their job done? And
mm,
again, it's a principle that is basic to cybersecurity, has been for decades, right? So I
yep,
think that's the kind of thing that that we need to have in place when you're putting these agents together. And
mm.
I'll go back to another question that you had, and I'm sorry if I'm jumping around a little bit, but
No, no, it's fine.
what's going to be what's going to be valuable in the resource of the future? I think it's somebody who knows and is comfortable with agents and can manage agents. I think
Yeah.
that's the kind of resource that you're really going to need in the future, in the SOC, in your even in your risk practice, and the business will need as a whole. Somebody's
Mm,
comfortable with that, who knows how to write agents, who knows how to run agents, who knows how to manage them, who knows what they need, and
yeah.
is smart about that. And again, necessarily, you'll have to have the kind of person who's comfortable with that technology.
Mm. And I'm also interested to hear whether you, like, in your experience, whether you believe that, AI is really, really good, or you can fully trust it to do certain tasks, but absolutely not other tasks. And this kind of, we go back to the human in the loop here as well. So, I mean, as an example with like incident triaging, right, where you have obviously, you first categorize whether it's a risk or not. And then, you go down the different stages and you prioritize based on that. Is it, for example, you can fully trust it to categorize if it's a risk or not? But then you might not, you might need the human in the loop when it comes to prioritization, for example. Is just like, maybe it's a bad example, but just to kind of get your take on what it's good at, what it's less good at.
No, I think it probably could do that fairly well. Again, it's very situational. Depends, right? I mean, it's
Mm.
a very consulting answer that I gave you. Depends, but it does depend
Yeah, yeah,
on the
yeah.
situation. And sometimes the systems are there. It's good enough to do that kind of at least the basic categorization, assuming that recategorization later doesn't put too much again its strain on the SIGA level 2 uh, support that you've got for them. So I
Mm,
think I think in that it can be trusted. But I'll shift left, for instance, right? Not
mm,
just like on the operations. Like I think too many CISOs think on that case. Um, one of my background is, at least one of them is in application security. I see the great use of um, AI in coding, and we were talking about sort of how I code by myself, hobbyist, and I'll give my example. I wanted to create a better Spotify recommendation system. I
mm,
wasn't satisfied with the basic Spotify algorithm. So I said, let me
mm.
let me code this together, and that necessitated like knowing how the Spotify API works, knowing some other API work
Yeah.
that I can pull in some data from, and uh, I can code, but I'm not really a Python guy. I want to do Python, so it was great for that. LLMs were great for that. I had like a basic system working in like 3 or 4 hours, which is
Mm,
amazing for somebody who doesn't really code full time. It would have
yeah.
taken me a few days to do that, so it was great for
Yeah.
that. But then when I started enhancing it and augmenting it and really trying to get it to do a few more features, it broke down immediately. I won't
Mm,
tell you which LLM I use, but it's the one that people say is the best for coding.
mm,
And I've used a couple others. And it doesn't take me very long, even with just a few hundred lines of code, to get it to, for instance, start forgetting things. The context window obviously is
mm,
passed. It just
mm,
forgets things. It gives me answers that are just plain wrong a lot of
mm,
times. And, usually the code is okay, but sometimes code's just really bad, right?
mm,
So I think
mm,
in this case, if you think about it, I think LLMs for coders, they can make a great coder even better by making them much more productive, 50 to 100% more productive, maybe even.
mm, mm,
They'll make a mediocre coder a bit better, by cleaning up their code, and I can send back sort of errors and have it check my code to see if there's improvements. But a bad coder will just put out more bad code, and they won't be able to fix it. I think that's the problem. And even there, I think in terms of vibe coding these days, I wouldn't just like have it spit out some code and try to run it. Definitely look at it line by line, see what it's trying to do, understand it very well, and make sure that it's not replacing your skill. You should still, it's fine to let it like put, give you a code snippet here and there. You put the basic framework around it, but know what the code does. And it's very basic with application security. So one of the things I worry about too is that there's a lot of pressure on development teams to ship code, right? Inevitably, the temptation to just throw it into LLM and ask you like, just write this for me, is going to be too great for a lot of folks to resist, and that means more bad code out there.
More technical debt.
And again, person in the loop, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And what we've been talking about here with AI is like, risks and vulnerabilities. So I'm just interested to hear, like, in summary, if you could set like a golden rule for using AI and cybersecurity today, what would it be?
Human in the loop, I think. I mean, I advocate. I think that's kind of the basic thing. I think as it goes on and as the systems get better, and they inevitably will get better because the leaps and strides almost every week, it seems, right? So they will get better. You'll be able to trust some of these things with more and more work, but always make sure that it's work that you can check. It's work that is as transparent as possible to you. Like, so when it's making decisions, it's very transparent for you. And I think a lot of, for instance, the whole idea behind the MCP, as I understand it, the MCP model, it's a framework for explainability. So as it's making decisions, it needs to be able to explain why it's making those decisions. And that transparency is very, very important. So make sure that you trust your MCP model context protocol. Make sure that you understand why it's making some decisions. And again, I wouldn't trust that to another LLM. I would trust it, to a person. But take a look.
Yeah.
The professional in the future will have to be even more fluent in cybersecurity than he was in the past. And on top of that, he or she will have to be comfortable with working with artificial intelligence systems.
Yes. And I'd like to talk finally a little bit about leadership and strategy culture. If you were Marco starting your career now, in the era of AI and these deep fakes, quantum computing on the horizon, what would you focus on? Do you think first? What would you perhaps do differently? A big question, maybe.
It's a big question. I mean, on like, again, I think back to the zeitgeist of the moment. It's like I would know and be comfortable and learn how to use AI systems very, very well. But that's not the first thing. I think the first thing I would probably do is learn how to code. I think that's kind of the basic thing with cybersecurity. I think even if you're going to be working in the less technical aspects of it, do learn how to code. I think there was like this, I know there was this big push to like everybody should learn how to code like a few years ago. And I think there's a lot of questions about like, would everybody work as programmers? You think, no, that's not the case. But it'll help you in your work if you understand how the systems operate, what goes behind the app that you're using, the application that you're using. So in a lot of ways, I do probably the same thing that I kind of fell into. It's like I learned how to code. I learned how to do that relatively well. I don't have to be expert at it, but I have to know how to write a decent amount of code. I'd have to know how to apply that to AI systems very well. This is the hard skills, the hard technical skills. But then I'd also want to be comfortable with the business aspect. I have to understand what risks there are, not just from a information security viewpoint, but what risks there are to the business, because that will inform how I want to protect the organization. That will inform the kind of risk appetite and risk tolerance, if I can use those terms, that the organization can and should have. And it's all very different. So if I were to do it again today, I would probably pay more attention to the business side of the aspects. And when I say business, it doesn't necessarily mean something mercantile. It could be, like if I'm working for an international organization, a nonprofit, there's the business of how you, for instance, ship vaccines to other places, or how you set policy for a particular, you name it, maybe maybe for health policy, for instance. Understand like what the business of your organization is, whether it's money
Yeah.
making or not, right? So I would spend more time learning how that sort of stuff works. And then I think the last thing, because I did move up to the ranks to do management, it's like I'd probably pay more attention to that sort of trying to administrative stuff. It's stuff I don't like to do. It's stuff I still shy away from. It's stuff that I need to get comfortable with, because ultimately making sure that that it's that I can justify kind of the costs of cybersecurity, and maybe even spin it around to something that can bring value. Not spin it around, but make sure that I need that this understand the value it brings. I think that's going to
Yeah.
be useful to anybody in the future. Whether you're going to go into management or not, I think it's going to be very useful, because as we spoke about at the very top of the show, eventually everybody's going to have to talk to somebody who's not familiar with cybersecurity and explain to them the value.
Yeah. I think it's a really, really interesting point. And how do you think leaders foster a culture of security awareness across the wider business? Not just within the IT departments or the cyber teams, for example. Like, how easy is that? How can it be done?
That's a whole practice in of itself,
Yeah.
and there are folks who do that, and it goes into training. I think what I'd rather, if you don't mind me, Lee, I might be saying so, Lee, I think what I would probably more focus on, because I think we can get folks who know how to do that across the organization. And folks are used to training, education, etc. Folks who can bring that out and make it interesting, and make sure that's taken care of, and make sure that's not just a checkbox, a compliance checkbox, and people do in fact have that. But what I would like to also concentrate on with my team is to make sure that I'm fostering the culture of curiosity. Understand what the rest of the organization is doing, be curious about it, be willing to learn. And I think that carries over. I find that those in my team who do that the best are sort of the best ambassadors for security. They're the best examples for that, because they're out there, they're going out and they're meeting people because they want to meet people. And they're telling them necessarily what we in the cybersecurity organization do. And to me, that's the best fostering of a cybersecurity mentality or culture that you can have. Not all the training that you need to do for compliance reasons. It's really one of my guys, maybe my red team guy, having coffee with the sales group or the HR group and telling them, hey, this kind of happened in the news yesterday. Let me explain to you what the issues are with your iPhone, your Android phone. That to me is the best way to foster a security culture. Have my guys go out there and tell them all the great things they're doing.
Yeah, good point. Finally, then, Marco, from me, what's one bold prediction you'd make about the intersection of AI and cybersecurity in the next, say, 5 years? Will AI become the defender's greatest ally, for example, or the attackers?
Yeah. I mean, I think we're seeing it already from the attacker's point of view. And I'll probably give one that's not all that bold, and it won't necessarily go in the next 5 years or so. I think within the next 6 to 12 months, we'll see like a major attack on an AI system that will really be significant. And I think it's inevitable. We already see that kind of in small jerks and drabs. We're going to see like a major one happening relatively soon. I can sort of, I can see that. I can sense that. I think we're way overdue for that already, frankly, at this point, because something that AI does is increase the attack surface. As we all know the terms, like, there's just one more thing that they need to attack. And it's something that, again, as we said, by our survey, 18% of organizations feel prepared to do it, prepared to manage it. there's a lot of folks who just are not going to be able to understand, and AI systems are being built right now that their defenders do not understand how to defend. It's going to
And what do
happen
you think?
relatively soon.
It's a super interesting point. What do you think the implications will be in the aftermath of an assumed attack?
I think, and we're already, I think, seeing sort of the peak of AI kind of hype at this point. I mean, again, it's my opinion, but I think it's shared by a bunch of different analysts. And we'll see that exacerbated by some of this, where maybe it pushes us over the edge into that, trough of disappointment, sort of. But I think that's okay, and it's natural. It's a natural cycle for any
Mm.
technology, and it's going to stabilize out of that. So I think this will bring
Yep.
people back to reality. I think this kind of, if I may steal a term, irrational exuberance for AI, I think will be tempered, and then people will take a closer look at their investments. Companies will take a closer look at their investments and say, okay, let's deploy this in a more reasonable way where I have a proper use case and can justify the costs of implementing this AI system, LLM, agentic, generative, whatever, right? I think that's essentially what's going to come out of that big event.
Yep. Fantastic. And before I round off here, Marco, is there anything else that you want to add?
Just that it's been great discussing this. I'd love to talk about it more. If people are interested, please reach out. This is kind of stuff that I'm very interested in discussing, particularly, especially if folks disagree with me. I'd love to hear somebody tell me you're completely wrong.
A nice, healthy
This is
debate.
why.
Yeah.
Exactly. This is why you're completely wrong. I love that because I learn more from that than for folks who agree with me anyway.
Yeah, for sure. A really, really good point. I think it's been a really, really interesting conversation. And yeah, so thank you so much for joining us, for sharing your insights on building strong cyber teams, using AI responsibly, and keeping organizations safe. And let's face it, a very, very fast changing world. So thanks so much for joining us.
Massively appreciate it.
And for those listening, thanks for joining. We hope you can take away practical ideas on both the opportunities and the risks of AI in cybersecurity. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with your network. Until next time, keep your workplace secure and keep building. We'll see you soon.